But where are you really from?
A podcast about the Asian American struggle.
Hey everyone, I'm Angela Lin.
And I'm Jesse Lin, and welcome back to But Where Are You Really From?
Today we have a very special guest, my brother, Johnny Lin. Oh, that's right.
Hello.
Want to introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them where you're really from?
Well, I was actually born in Taiwan, unlike Angela.
Yeah.
I grew up here though, so I moved here when I was 6 years old, a long, long time ago. And I grew up in Irvine, California, just like Angela. So, yeah.
Nice. Hey everyone, we love doing this podcast, and if you enjoy our episodes, we'd really appreciate if you could support us in any number of ways. First is by subscribing to us, rating us, and reviewing us on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. The second is by telling a friend. Third is following us on Instagram at whereareyoufrompod. Fourth is buying our merch on our website. And fifth is by joining our Patreon community. And you can find more about all of this by looking at our link in bio at our Instagram. Again, the handle is at whereareyoufrompod. Thank you. And yeah, Jesse whispered this while while I was introducing my brother, but let's just set the record straight that Jesse and I are not related, and my real brother is now on this episode with us.
Although many people think Jesse is part of our family.
Yeah, it gets very
Yes.
confusing for people because we have the same last name and Jesse and Johnny, so it's like two J names. So especially on social media, I feel like people get confused when they see like us interacting with each other.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in more of your like photos from recent because we were like actually in this, well, recent meaning a few years ago when you were still in the city, but like we were actually in the same location for a while.
Well, okay. So if you guys haven't guessed, today's episode is all around the concept of siblings and how growing up with a sibling or without a sibling kind of impacted our experiences growing up. And like my brother and I are very different. You'll probably see on this episode. So just getting down to kind of like what contributed to that and how do we see our identities differently or similarly. So one thing we wanted to first talk about is comparing and contrasting like whether or not you had a sibling growing up. So Jesse, even though everyone thought you were my brother, you actually are an only child. So like what was that like growing up, and did you always wish you had a sibling, or were you like, I'm chill, I'm the star?
Yeah, it is quite interesting. It's a little hard to tell. It's a little hard to say because I don't have a sibling, as you mentioned, so I don't really know what the experience is like to necessarily have a sibling. Like you can see from the outside and you're like, okay, it looks something like this, but you don't really know. But I will say what I think the differences are, at least for me. I feel like I had a lot more pressure than my friends who had siblings because you have, I will just say it in the most blunt way possible. Like your parents don't have to put all of their eggs in a basket, basically. There are more baskets that they can put the eggs in. And so the pressure is more distributed in a sense, even though we've talked about like the firstborn usually carries like all of the pressure, or if it's a guy, he might carry all of the pressure. But I generally feel like my friends with more siblings, there was a little less pressure overall because there's more of you. And so, if one of you fucks up, there's still like a few more of you that your parents can put their stakes on. So number one, I felt like there's a lot more pressure. Number two, I definitely, there are points of my childhood growing up where I felt really lonely because I didn't really have anyone to share the pressures or expectations or things that my parents were telling me that I had to live up to or do with. And so from that perspective, it was a little bit lonely sometimes because it just felt like I couldn't find anybody who would understand the situation that I was in at the time in terms of how I was feeling and reacting to the pressures and stuff. And the last one I will say is the good one is that now that I look back on it, I feel really blessed in a way to have been an only child because now I understand kind of the financial situation that my parents had been in and like are still in. And just thinking about having another sibling, that would have been quite impossible from the money standpoint, and it would have made everything like 50 million times harder. So I am really glad from that perspective, like not to have to split anything with anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And okay, well, first of all, I feel weird because every time I want to say my brother's name, so his name is Johnny, but my parents like can't pronounce that. So his the way we pronounce it at home is like Joni. So it's kind of like Joan with like Joan,
Joni. Joni.
Joni. Yeah, anyways.
You can call me that,
So
Joni.
that's not Joni. Anyways, so I want to ask you because I feel like so for those who don't know, he's 7 years older than me. So we are siblings. I'm the younger, but that's a huge age gap. So
Yeah.
like you were the only child for a long time, and like you said, you were 6 when you moved to the US. So like your entire time in Taiwan, you were an only child, right?
Yeah.
Until our parents had me. So what was that like? Like, were you like, fuck this, I have to share attention now with like a younger sibling? Or what was that like when you suddenly had like another person you had to share the spotlight with?
I mean, honestly, I was very young when, I was 7 years old
Yeah.
when, you were born. And so I didn't remember like half my life before that, really, you know. I didn't have any real memories of Taiwan until I was like 4 or 5 actually. So in terms of remembering Taiwan, I only remember like 2 years of it by myself. And honestly, having you was actually exciting because it was kind of lonely. Like we moved here without any friends, but I thought it was kind of interesting having you, like, because it was like, a new thing. I don't think I was like the jealous little brother, because like I don't think our mom gave us any attention. Like, she doesn't really play favorites. I realize like our
Are
mom
you
doesn't really.
sure?
I think so. Like, I feel like she doesn't. And so she never like doted me, and then like when you came, she
That's
started paying
true.
all the attention to her.
That's
You,
true.
I mean. So I don't really feel like it was different. And actually just it was more exciting to me to have like a little sister.
That's funny. Nice. What about, so I mean, this podcast is all about our kind of like mixed identities, right? Because we're both Taiwanese and American. But your experience is very different than, well, not very different, but it's different than mine because like you said, you were born in Taiwan. You actually grew up partially there, and you do have some memories. It's not like it's like deep, deep memories, but you have memories of being raised there and then actually having moved to the US versus like US is all I know. We've visited Taiwan for sure, but like I never lived there. And I feel like I remember you telling stories of like having a hard time
Yeah.
assimilating.
Oh
So
yeah.
what was that like when you first, moved here and like started going to school here and like people made fun of you, or
Oh
like
yeah.
what was that like?
Okay, so I started first grade in Cerritos. And it was like a mainstream school. So basically, it was just a typical public school, elementary school. And then I didn't know any English. I could barely say ABC without it. Oh, I said ABC with an accent, and so everything was like foreign to me. And I just remember being I don't remember, but mom kind of said that I was bullied by like apparently this Korean boy or
What the
something.
hell was that? I hate that it's like other
Yeah.
Asian people.
And I was crying and I wasn't having fun. So apparently they knew someone who knew about this bilingual school. So it was this teacher from Taiwan who also spoke English. And then basically it was pretty rare back then, but it was like an immersion school. And in Cerritos, they had a bilingual immersion school, Chinese English. So they would teach half the class in English and half the class in Chinese. And so they pulled me out of the mainstream school and then they put me in this immersion school. And I had the best time of my life. Well,
Aw.
at least my little life then. It was like I made so many friends and like I remember having like a lot of friends and like everyone's, I could identify with because they were speaking both Chinese and English. So it was, and I picked up English so quickly. Like I was almost fluent by the year end.
Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah, and like I remember hearing myself like in recordings, like it was so different, like my English. And then but unfortunately we moved to Irvine, so I didn't really get to, but I was there for a year and it was actually a really good experience. So having that bilingual immersion school that really changed like my feeling towards coming here because I think I was miserable the first month or so. So after I moved to Irvine, they integrated me back into mainstream elementary school, but they would pull me out for an hour a day to go to ESL. And so it was just an hour a day, and then I was with like 5 other ESL kids. Like I remember one was like Hispanic, and but I don't remember the people there that well. But it was just, a little additional training beyond the mainstream. But I didn't go to an immersion school after that. And then I was in ESL for maybe 3 more years after that until 5th grade, and then I moved out of ESL.
And I feel like, what was that like still learning English? And also because like you're saying that was only 1 hour a day once you were back in just normal public school. So like how was integrating into the rest of the classroom with people that, were native English speakers? Did they like welcome you? Did it feel hard to make friends with them? Like what was that experience like?
Actually, I feel like after my year in the immersion program, I was near fluent. And then when I moved to Irvine, back then Irvine wasn't as like diverse as it was today. I think early 90s, but basically it was just the Asian population wasn't as big then. So I was one of the few Asians in my class actually in Irvine. And I just remember being made fun of like for my nose and like my eyes. Like actually kids would tease me and stuff for that. So I was still bullied, but mainly not for my English, but mainly for my Asian appearance. And I just remember I was closer to someone from like a Hispanic back. I remember like a kid that was Hispanic that I made friends with, or like Persian. I didn't identify as well with like the Caucasian Americans in my class because they were the ones making fun of me. Yeah, so it was more that than my English.
See, I remember you telling me this and not really understanding that because it feels like our age gap is a significant number of years, but it's not like we're a different generation, right? Like we're not that far apart. So then when I think back on my childhood, I definitely, to your point, Irvine has changed a lot since we were kids. So like now it's probably like, I don't know, 60-40 Asian people to white people or other races. But back then, at least when Jesse and I were growing up, it was probably more like the reverse, right? Like, I don't know, 40% Asian or something. But I definitely wasn't like the only Asian kid in my class. And it didn't feel like I was so different from other people. So when you told me those experiences of getting bullied for how you looked, I was like, I don't even get that because I never had that experience. But it must have been so hard because you went from, especially coming from a country where everyone looks like you, like has similar features, and then suddenly being told your features are like weird.
Kids would make fun of you because they realized I looked more like an immigrant, like
Yeah.
look more like a fob. Like basically my clothes looked like a fob and I kind of spoke maybe with a little accent. So I think was a little bit different from other Asian Americans that grew up here. Yeah. But that was basically before middle school.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Mm.
then I just remember, even um, kids would like, I remember, okay, so I was getting the mail once for mom, and then um, these neighborhood kids would come and they're like, "Oh, look at your shorts," and then they'd actually pull my shorts down, and I started crying. I was like,
What a kid
yeah,
stereotype thing to do.
yeah.
Wow.
So, and it was interesting because I didn't like see a difference between like Asians who made fun of me and like non-Asians.
Mm-hmm.
Like I treated them both equally. But in the end, I feel like I identified more with the Asian kids in the class. Yeah, who were Asian and non-white, like the Hispanic or the Persians.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So a lot of my friends were non-white growing up.
Makes sense.
I also kind of feel like maybe our experience, like Angela, your eyes, is a little bit different because we were born here. So my perspective on it, like as far as I can remember as a kid, is that like you go to preschool, then you go to kindergarten, but for the most part, if you stay in the school, you're with the same cohort of people, more or less. So it's less the same experience as you because we're coming in at a period where kids aren't as mean. They're younger, they're less exclusionary, and they're like, because I remember when I went to a preschool, I didn't know any English, but I still had a blast not being able to say anything to anybody. So I feel like being here and having that made us experience a little less of the bullying because we were part of a cohort of people that were growing through the different grades. So it's like less easy to pick us out and single us out because we had been there from the beginning, essentially.
But Jesse, that's a good point because actually, we moved around a lot. Like we probably moved like 8 to 10 times on our, life. So, I don't know why, but like my parents like to move. So, and Angela, if you remember, our cousins lived with us too.
Yeah, yeah.
So like we had two cousins that lived with us, and so we had a big house. And then when they moved to college, we moved again. We had we bought a house, but we sold it because
Oh, I
we
throw a
wanted
tantrum about
to
that.
make profit off of that house. So we moved a lot, and so I didn't really have like a stable like educational experience.
Mm.
I think for you, Angela, though, like it was better because maybe a lot of the moving was done before you really started school.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I remember crying about it once, and it was because the move the only one I remember is from like kindergarten to first grade. We changed like the school, not the school district because it was all the Irvine school district, but like the way it worked was depending on which neighborhood you lived in, you went to a certain elementary school or whatever. So to Jesse's point, like I had already had this cohort built up from kindergarten and I had like my best friend who was a Japanese American girl and I was like I'm stoked to continue with these friends and then our parents were like we're moving and now you're going to go to a different elementary school than them and I was like no. So that's the only one I remember. Okay, well, let's also talk about, like, I already hinted at that Jesse and I rejected our Asianness growing up. I'm curious what that experience was like for you because you literally came from Asia. And I'm sure there was part of you that was, you're trying to immerse as much as possible so that the bullying would stop. But did you ever feel like you wanted to reject that part of you, or were you just like, I'm just trying to figure out how to be both, and like, I'm proud to be Taiwanese?
I I'm a little different from you two because I actually really embraced my Asian culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was proud of the fact that I could speak both Chinese and English. And like when I went to a Chinese environment, I felt comfortable. Like
Mm.
Chinese school, I love Chinese school, and then we would go back to Taiwan every summer. I loved going back to Taiwan because I felt like I was like popular and I was like people like got me when I was
Mm.
in an Asian
Mm.
environment.
Mm.
Like and I understood them. Like I identified more as an Asian person than as an American because I was made fun of when I was in
Yeah.
American school and
Mm.
teased. And so when I went back to Asia, I felt like I was the popular kid. Like everyone wanted to know, oh, it's the American. They thought of me as an American. Like,
Yeah.
oh, the American's back and he can like tell us about America. And I felt, more comfortable and integrated in
Mm.
an Asian environment. Um, I think being like bilingual really helps, and being able to speak Chinese. And so, for me, I did not reject my Asian culture at all. Like I loved Asian culture. Like I wanted to, listen to more like Chinese pop music and
Oh,
like
you love J. Chow
yeah,
and like
Jolin Tsai, Ame Chang, like every one of those people, and like I embraced it. Like I loved Asian food. I loved Asian culture, but speaking to like my Chinese or Taiwanese friends, they're like, "Oh no, you don't want to grow up in Taiwan.
mm,
Like as a kid, it's
Mm.
very stressful. It's very,
Mm.
like high pressure." So in a way, it's like maybe I got the best of both worlds by, being bilingual and being able to, speak Chinese, but also growing up in America because I didn't have to go through all that, pressure
mm.
of growing up as a kid in Asia. And so but for me, like I embraced Asian culture. I almost preferred being a fob.
Well, let's dig into a couple other ways that your experience was different than mine or Jesse's. One big difference is that you were the oldest child, and we all know, and a boy. So we all know that in many Asian cultures, being the son or like the eldest son has like different connotations than being either a younger son or like younger daughter or a different sibling, because there's expectations that come with that, like you're supposed to carry on the family name and like the pride and the legacy of the Lin family or whatever. So did any of that feel like, how much of that pressure did you feel growing up, and how did that affect you?
Well, as a kid, I didn't know any of that. Like like our parents didn't really emphasize, that as we growing up. But it was more when I became an adult, and I just remember the time when I came out as being gay. That was the time when I realized she had all these internal feelings about
Mm,
carrying on the lineage. Because when I came out, and Angela helped me with that, but basically she told me like, that this is the end of our lineage. Like if I don't have kids and I can't have a wife and family. Um, and she said, we're going to be a disgrace to our ancestors who expect us to carry on the lineage. So before that, I didn't know any of that. And this came out basically, all her feelings about that came out when I
mm,
came out. So um, that was the only time I realized that that mattered to her. Yeah. And before that, though, she never mentioned anything about that.
Well, let's talk about like the difference in like family size between like our families and like what our parents' families look like, because I definitely feel like it's very different, and there is some, let's say, bent that it puts on our parents in terms of thinking about how to plan for the future and like passing along the family name and all of that. It's easier when you have more kids, because when you have like few fucked up kids, you still have like a few more that you can like move along. And I feel like our parents still have that idea that they can do that, but they have less kids to do that with. So then it becomes like this intense pressure on you to do all of these things that they were also pressured to do, but maybe was actually less pressure because there are more of them to distribute that responsibility against. Like my my mom has four four or five sisters and a brother, and my dad has three brothers and one sister. And us, we there's two of you and one of me. So it's like a very the size of the family, and like how many fuck ups, quote unquote, a family can survive is much smaller. So I definitely feel like I'm kicking off. I feel like there's definitely some of that pressure that's just like this mindset that they're trying to apply here, but there's like fewer kids to apply it to.
Yeah, I feel like our parents' generation, the average size family was somewhere between like 5 to 7 kids, which is a shit ton of kids. Because, yeah, both of our parents' sides are also around that size. And I feel like I agree with you that there's less pressure on each individual kid when you have to like spread it across so many kids and you're just trying to like make sure they survive, right? You're like, let me just like have enough money to and like work hard enough so that they can live. Um, but I feel like it's not totally fair to say they didn't have like any pressure growing up because I feel like they had totally different pressures. Like a big reason, not just Asian people, but like that whole generation used to have a shit ton of kids is because those kids would be expected to help raise the younger kids and like earn money for the family. And my mom always talks about how she used to like sell vegetables in the in the
Market.
market with our grandma and stuff because it was like she'd do that during the day or night or something and then go to school at night or vice versa, but she had to like do both. And how lucky my brother and I are that like we don't have to have such hardship to just live. And so they had like different pressures. It wasn't like you have to become a doctor. It's like, hey, you're in this family, you're earning money for our family just so that we can all like live.
I think it's what Jesse says is true, but it is the a transitional phase right now in terms of uh, Chinese culture or Taiwanese culture. Uh, Definitely, our parents kind of were stuck in between.
Yeah.
Like they were the first generation, I think, that kind of saw the future. Like before that, Chinese culture was very traditional. Like you wouldn't even have heard of anyone not getting married and having kids. They're the first generation where they themselves may not have kids or have only one or two. So I think our parents live in a very interesting time in terms of the generational bridge between conservative Asian culture and liberal Asian culture. And I think that puts them into a very interesting struggle because they're trying to juggle what their upbringing is, but then living in the reality that Chinese and Taiwanese society has changed, you know? And so I think they know that, like, they know how to admit the truth that, you know, we're currently living in this era where people may not have kids anymore. So, and definitely in the generation that we're in now, it's almost expected that you only have one or two.
I remember, like our parents didn't share much about their upbringing to us, but there were like little morsels they would share with us because we like pried it out of them. Like, oh, when did you and dad meet? Like, when did you get married? Did you date people before that? You know, we were trying to pry a little bit about this. And I remember our mom saying that my dad was her only boyfriend. They met when she was 27 or something.
She was 27, he
Oh,
was 30.
yeah, and then they got married. So like I remember when I turned 27, I was like, "Fuck, should I be married right now?" Like,
And that was considered old in my
yes,
mom's era,
yeah,
our
yeah.
mom's era.
So yeah, I feel like I agree with you that like it was weirder for their generation to not already be married and popped out like many kids by early mid 20s than it is for us where they kind of like rationalize it for us now. They're like, "Oh, you're still in school, you are like focused on your career." They're not so pushy about that.
And I think also I mean, like moving here to the US, you know, exposes them to more liberal mindset too. So actually, I think in terms of my parent or our parents at least, they don't give us any pressure really to have kids. It's just kind of more subtle,
It's
like
subliminal.
subliminal. Like for example, like our dad. We didn't really talk about our dad, but basically, like whenever he sees little kids, his face like lights up. Like I've
It's
never seen him
super
so happy.
creepy.
Yeah,
Thanks.
It's very like pedo TBH.
Oh my
really.
gosh.
I've told him he needs to stop. Like he gets so giddy when he sees little baby around
Yeah.
him or a toddler. So he is like staring at this child he doesn't know and like smiling uncontrollably and staring at this child. I was like, Dad, you are like an older man staring at a child. that you don't know.
And you know he never smiles, right? So the
Yeah.
fact that he's smiling, and then when I ask him like, "Do you want a grandson or granddaughter?" She's like, "Of course I do."
Yeah.
So it's more ingrained. It's not like they give us pressure though.
I think there's also like phases because like I was supposed to get married this year and it's pushed, but or last year. Time doesn't mean anything. Anyways, and so they haven't like pushed that on me outright. But Karen, our Jesse and my other best friend, she has been married for, oh my God, how many years is it? I don't know, like 3 or 4 years. And he constantly asks me if she is having a baby anytime soon. Like, I feel like he just latches onto like the scenario he thinks it's okay to ask that thing, and it's kind of like
Implicit.
subliminal. Yes, exactly. Like, oh well, I'm asking about her, but really I'm asking about you too.
I mean, now that they know I'm gay, I mean, you're the kind of burden now that has
Yes.
to carry forth the Lin family's name, even though it's not going to be the Lin family anymore.
Well, thanks for this conversation. We're going to transition over to our closing section, which we call the fortune cookie. And for the fortune cookie, we're going to have an open season on Angela, where we recount the most embarrassing moments of her life to everybody that listens to this podcast.
Okay, let's make it fun. So, if you remember, you were actually very into Taiwanese dramas.
Yeah.
Like, you loved F4,
Yeah, I did.
and you were like obsessed with them. Like Vanessa, and what's the other one? Like,
Well, I gave them all equal opportunity, but I over skewed on Vanessa. Yes.
and you actually, that was why I was surprised when like you started like saying you didn't like Asian culture, because you were very Asian in like middle school.
Yeah. It was a 2-year concentrated blip of being really Chinese.
Yeah, you were like super Chinese and like or Asian, and you love Meteor Garden.
Yeah, I did.
You were like singing all their songs.
I still remember at least 50% of the lyrics.
Oh my gosh. What's embarrassing?
Most things about our upbringing, but
Yeah, there are like so many different moments, but I will just say like the period from like middle school to high school was like an excruciating needs to delete. It was like extremely layered hair and like cow like the emo girl hair.
I had a
remember
cowlick.
Extremely
that.
layered.
Yeah.
Not like it was kind
It
of
was
like
a
it wasn't.
it was a permanent cowlick,
Yeah.
cut
It's
grass looking thing
Yeah.
at the top of my head.
I guess it's not a cowlick because a cowlick is like not intentional, but you had
Yeah.
you had it like intentionally like that. And oh girl, that was a look.
Well, okay, you got your chance and you used it, so no more chance. It's now closed. All right, well, we had a lot of fun talking to you about so many things, so thank you for joining us on this sibling episode. For you listeners, if you have questions for my brother or you liked a certain topic that we got into, because I think we talked about a lot, actually. A lot more than we even thought we'd talk about. If you have
Or if
opinions,
you want to know any secrets about Angela.
Oh yes.
we'll see. We'll see about that. I screen all the emails. But anyways, if you have opinions or feedback or questions, you can write us in at telluswhereyou'refrom@gmail.com. The your is YOURE. And reminder that we are still looking for listener story submissions. So write us in about your experience with either this topic or whatever you want.
And come back next week for another episode. And until then,
再
见
bitches.